Hi, my name is Matt Young, Assistant Superintendent with Cuyahoga Heights Schools.
And I'm Kelly Cummins, speech-language pathologist and member of the district literacy team.
Thank you for taking the opportunity to watch this short video describing literacy in the state of Ohio and literacy here at the Cuyahoga Heights School District. Today we hope to achieve a couple of things. We're going to share and explain details of Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement, how Cuyahoga Heights Schools aligns with that plan to raise literacy achievement, some key aspects of early literacy, student assessment results, and what the next steps are for your child in their literacy journey. First, let's take a moment to talk about Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. You may be familiar with the third grade reading guarantee, which was first introduced back in 2012. This law required all school districts and schools to screen every student, kindergarten through grade 3, with a state-approved assessment to determine whether the student is on or not on grade level for reading readiness. Each learner identified as a struggling reader is required to receive a RIMP, which is a Reading Improvement and Monitoring Plan, to individualize reading instruction based on the learner's identified needs. The services provided through these plans must be grounded in scientific reading. Most recently, you've probably heard about the science of reading, and certainly that would fulfill this alignment of scientific evidence-based reading instruction and intervention. Beginning this year, schools are required to use this screening process to identify risk factors for dyslexia as well. Results are not a diagnosis of dyslexia, but rather an avenue to develop more targeted plans to address gaps in early literacy.
So, the science of reading. What is the science of reading? It is a culmination of research that has happened over many, many decades that has now informed how children best learn to read. It is utilizing knowledge on how we acquire language, how our brains process language, and what our brains are doing when we are reading. And all of that knowledge has been put together to determine what are those best practices and what are the most effective ways to teach reading in our school. We know that children benefit from explicit and systematic instruction in these areas of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension, and writing. These are the keys to becoming effective readers. Within the science of reading, there is something called the simple view of reading, and this equation is how you become an effective reader and have strong reading comprehension skills. This equation is word recognition multiplied by language comprehension equals reading comprehension. But what does that mean? Phonological awareness is one part of word recognition. That is the ability of somebody to manipulate sounds within their head. So for example, Matt, if I told you to say cat.
Cat.
Now say cat without the k.
At.
Exactly. He's taking those sounds in, manipulating that word and those sounds in his brain, and spitting out the result. Cat without k equals at. The next component that goes into word recognition is phonics. And this is where you take that sound knowledge and you apply it to the letters on the page. We learn the rules of how letters can be combined to be able to create words. And we start to gain that automaticity and sight reading ability when we are actually reading those words on the page. That equates to word recognition, and those are the early literacy components that are essential for children to become effective readers. The other component of the simple view of reading is language comprehension. This is involving vocabulary, background knowledge, understanding of the structure of language. This is important to be able to have reading comprehension because, yes, you may be able to attack a word on a page and get the word out, but if you don't know what the word means, you're not going to be able to understand what you have just read. So within the simple view of reading, you need both of those components to truly have reading comprehension and be an effective reader. What does literacy instruction look like at Cuyahoga Heights Elementary School? We provide instruction on a multi-tier system of support model. This means that there are multiple tiers of instruction and support provided to each student. The first tier, Tier 1, is high-quality instruction that is provided to all students. This is their literacy core curriculum that every student receives each day. In our district, we use Heggerty for phonological awareness instruction. We use foundations for phonics instruction, and we use various knowledge building curriculums that are based on state standards to help build that knowledge and language comprehension component that we just talked about. Another component of the Tier 1 level of support involves universal screenings. As Matt said earlier, this is not a new concept for our district. We have been providing universal screenings for a very long time. This year, we have shifted to use Amplify Education's M-Class to screen the early literacy skills of our students. This screener looks at very specific skills that are outlined as important by the science of reading. The subtests in this assessment include letter naming fluency, which assesses a student's ability to name the letters that they see on a page. We also look at phonemic segmentation fluency, which assesses a student's ability to segment or break down a word that they hear auditorily, sound by sound. We look at a student's ability to break down nonsense words in the subtest nonsense word fluency. In this test, they're given non-real words that they have to then blend together the sounds to create that word. Oral reading fluency looks at a student's automaticity and ability to read a passage fluently in a certain amount of time. Lastly, some of our older students take the maze subtest. This is a subtest where they actually are assessing the comprehension of the language that's on the page by having students decide which word fits best into a sentence from a choice of 3.
Thank you, Kelly, for taking the time to explain those early literacy skills that we screened with the Dibbles M-Class. Now, each family received a report on how your child did on that particular screener. Within the report, you will notice there are various aspects of early literacy that were assessed, and your student fell in one of 4 categories. They are either above benchmark, at benchmark, below benchmark, or well below benchmark. For those students who are above benchmark or at benchmark, they are receiving the Tier 1 instruction that Kelly referenced, in addition to Tier 1 enrichment and intervention during their IE period. For a student who is below benchmark, they receive Tier 1 instruction, but they are also going to receive Tier 2 interventions and enrichment during that IE period. In addition, those students must be placed on a reading improvement and monitoring plan per the law we talked about earlier in the presentation. Finally, for those students who score well below benchmark, those students will receive Tier 1 instruction in addition to Tier 2 intervention and enrichment. Those students are also required to be placed on a reading improvement and monitoring plan. And those students will also be monitored for dyslexia risk factors that are related to those early literacy skills that Kelly explained just a brief moment ago.
So what is Tier 2? As Matt said, any student that falls below benchmark or well below benchmark will enter Tier 2 interventions and support. This process begins with a diagnostic screening. A Tier 2 diagnostic is a skill-based screening tool that assesses individual skills along an instructional continuum. The idea is we want to find the most appropriate starting point for your student and be able to provide high-quality, small group instruction and support to make sure that we are trying to close those gaps and get your child back on track. Within that, once we have done that screening, we then will develop goals specific to the information that screening provides. It is important to note that all Tier 2 supports are happening in addition to their Tier 1 core curriculum. As Matt had mentioned, we have an intervention and enrichment block already scheduled into our day, and it is during this time that our teachers are taking small groups of kids to work on those focused skills that are necessary to help close gaps and get students back on track. Throughout this process, regular data collection occurs, and we interpret that data to help inform the instructional needs of your student. Progress monitoring is directly aligned with the curriculums that your students are already engaging in. These are periodic assessments that happen on a regular time schedule that provide our teachers and multi-tiered system of support teams data to be able to analyze growth and make further decisions. In addition to this regular progress monitoring that happens throughout the year, we also will be redoing the M-Class assessments 3 times a year to attain 3 benchmark scores similar to those that you just received. The last tier in our multi-tiered system support is Tier 3. Through the process of progress monitoring and data analysis, if it is determined that a student is not making sufficient progress, the MTSS team, which includes the parent, may choose to move a student to Tier 3 supports. Within this Tier 3, that student will receive intensive intervention in the areas of structured literacy. In our district, we use Wilson Reading System. This is a structured literacy program with a systematic and explicit progression of skills that are taught in incredibly small groups or one-on-one with each child. It is important to note that all of these tiers, tiers 1, 2, and 3, are general education initiatives. This is not an identification of special education. And throughout this time, the data that we are collecting inform that decision-making process.
New for the 2023-24 school year, school districts are required by law to notify families of students who have presented risk factors for dyslexia.
Dyslexia is a specific learning disorder involving the brain's ability to process letters and sounds. People with dyslexia may experience difficulties with fluent word recognition, spelling, and decoding skills. These deficits are generally inconsistent with a person's intelligence, motivation, or sensory capabilities. According to Ohio's Dyslexia Guidebook, risk factors include inaccurate reading of text, disfluent reading of text, difficulty with automatic word recognition, difficulty matching sounds to letters, difficulty blending and segmenting sounds into spoken words, difficulty naming letters, slow progress or resource-intensive progress despite effective structured literacy instruction and intervention. The screening requirements outlined in this law include all students in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade and any student who moves into the district up through grade 6. If your student received a score well below benchmark on the M-Class Universal Screening Assessment, the district is required to notify you that your student is demonstrating tendencies that may indicate potential risk factors for dyslexia. It is important to note that this is not a diagnosis of dyslexia, nor is it a special education identification. This information will be used to guide the interventions and progress monitoring that will take place during the MTSS process as discussed previously in this presentation. It is also necessary to mention that any student who is already receiving special education services and specialized instruction in reading through an IEP will not need an additional reading plan through the MTSS process. Those goals identified in their IEP are already addressing their needs as outlined by these assessments.
Well, Kelly, that's a wrap. We want to thank everybody out there for joining us for this short presentation on early literacy at Cuyahoga Heights.
Thank you guys very much, and we look forward to working with your students and watching their reading grow.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either one of us here at Cuyahoga Heights Schools. Take care.